Hello, everyone. Welcome to Grace Every Day, a podcast for Christian wives of blue collar guys. So, last episode, we talked about increasing your influence with your spouse. And the week before that, I talked about the ladder of influence and how the foundational step on the ladder of influence is based on control of self. So, this week, I wanted to build on those two episodes and build on that concept and talk about the second step on the ladder of influence, the character development step. First, First and foremost, character development is generally not fun. Isn't it interesting that the experiences in life that help us grow are usually not the fun experiences? Growth is not often fun, but it's important and it's worth it. Well, number one, why? Why is growth important? Number one, challenges and problems will always seem smaller when you grow because developing who you are will change how you see things and it will help you change how you think and probably what you think about. And as a result, you'll start to feel differently and you'll start to make different choices in life. And that is going to affect your results and circumstances, right? I use the analogy of a teenager when I'm trying to teach this. Look back over your life and think back to when you were a teenager. Do you think differently at 14 and 15 years old than you do today when you look back? And of course you do, right? When you look back to when you were a teen, you think to yourself, man, I thought I had problems back then. And they were real problems to you, but you look back now and you're like, I don't have real problems back then. I have real problems today. The problems I deal with today are so much more than the problems I dealt with as a teenager. And it's not that the problem has changed, it's just that you have grown over the years. The problem didn't change. Trust me, you have changed. Just as a natural result of growth, whether intentional or unintentional, you have grown and you see things differently than you did before you had that growth. So think about this. What if we could grow today so that tomorrow's problems don't look so challenging, right? The problems we face in life don't have the ability to change size and to grow, but we do. And when you grow, the obstacles that you face are going to seem smaller in comparison. So, number two, it brings rewards, benefits, and positive outcomes, some of which you cannot even imagine right now. You just have to trust the process of growth. And it's kind of like the law of the harvest, right? You've heard probably the analogy before, you reap what you sow. So you plant orange seeds, you're going to get orange trees. You plant apple seeds, you get apple trees. You can't expect to get apple trees if you're planting orange seeds, right? It's just one of those principles that is foundationally true, fundamentally true. You plant personal growth and character development, you will get the results and the benefits from that over time. Now, here's the thing. It will take time. It's not going to happen instantly. It's not going to happen immediately. It does take time. But growth always brings a return on the investment. Now, I think that many women understand this a little more intuitively, perhaps than men. Just intuitively, more women that I meet are more open to growth than men. Women tend to read more books overall. Women tend to be more excited about taking classes, just as a natural consequence of being different, right? Women just intuitively grasp the concept of being willing to be open to growth. Now, not everybody, of course. Most of the women that I meet, most of the people that I meet, I see more women who are already active readers, who are, ready to try and grow themselves and develop themselves. And that's just my perception, of course. Not everyone is like that. But intuitively, I think women just understand this concept a little more, that growth will reap rewards. Growth will bring new opportunities as well. And again, a lot of those you cannot even begin to imagine right now. It's much like you're driving across the country and you're like, I can't see that far. But if you just drive to the first bend in the road, you can see a little further down the road. Drive to the next bend in the road, you can see a little further, right? That's just a very simple analogy, but it's the same way with personal growth, character development. You can't see all the way to the destination right now, but you can maybe see to the first bend in the road. So go there, grow there. Now, the problem is that a lot of times we focus more on competency growth in our culture than we do on character growth. And most of the return on your growth investment is going to come from character development. I saw this in my own career many times. I remember in 2007, I graduated with my associate's degree, and I realized, hey, that wasn't going to open all of the doors that I wanted open in my career. I needed more career options. I wanted more career options. So I decided to go back to school and get another degree. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. The degree certainly did help open some doors for me. But when I started intentionally developing who I was as a person in terms of character, that's when I saw opportunities just launch and expand quickly. I read a few personal growth kind of books, personal growth type books in my early 20s, but not really regularly until about 2008. And I remember that because it was one of those defining moments. I attended a simulcast, which is kind of basically like you go into an auditorium and they put up a big giant screen and they played or broadcast a leadership event that was happening somewhere else. That's a lot more common now, but I mean, this was 18 something years ago. It was a lot less common to have events like that. So I went to a simulcast, a leadership simulcast, and they had quite a few speakers there. I remember some of them, Liz Murray, from Homeless to Harvard. John Maxwell was one of them. And, they had breaks throughout the day and lunch and all of that, but they also had a table with books for sale um, from some of the speakers at the event. And I bought a couple of those books. And I remember that so vividly because it was a big deal for me. $30 spent in books wasn't a terribly large amount of money. Well, it was a lot more money back then than it would be now, but even so, it wasn't like a huge major purchase. But it was the first time I'd spent significant money on my personal growth and my character development. And I just remember writing the check and then thinking, wow, I've got to, go tell Mac that I spent this money, and he might not understand why, but to his credit, he was very supportive, even though he was like, why do you need more books? He was not quite interested at the time in reading leadership and personal growth books, even though just a few months later he got interested in that. So, kind of a side note there. But for me at the time, it was a big deal. It was a big deal because it was the first defining moment I can remember intentionally investing in the character side of my development. The reason that's important is because when we start to change the way we think, we change our life, right? Change the way you think, and you will change your life. And that was the first moment that I had a thought of changing the way I think. And little could I have guessed that those first leadership and personal growth books that I bought way back in early 2008 would lead me to eventually writing my own books. And today we've got like 34 personal growth books and journals. And I couldn't have guessed that those first leadership books would eventually lead me to starting my own podcast and all of the opportunities that we've had to speak to, leading to appearing on Dr. Phil's primetime show or speaking at the United States Capitol, doing a TEDx talk, and today speaking to people from stages all across the country and even other countries, right? So when you think about that, we often don't know where growth is going to lead us, but we just have to be committed to the process of growth, right? Knowing that it will bring a return, rewards, more opportunities. But we have to be intentional about it. Growth is kind of like exercise. It's not going to come happen to you. You got to go after it. There are a couple of ways that growth can happen. The first one is, of course, just accidentally or naturally as a result of living, right? Growth can happen just from going through life. We do grow to some degree as we get older. We don't necessarily grow or get more mature, but many of us do grow a little bit and, just grow a little bit over time through the experiences of life. Becoming an adult, being responsible for your family, all of these situations and circumstances that we go through in life can lead to some growth over time. Growth can happen accidentally through adversity. It can happen through experiences, circumstances. I remember this line from an old country music song. Maybe Reba McEntire sings it, and the singer is just lamenting about a breakup or relationship, as many country music songs do, and how she thought the world was just going to come to an end because her world was coming to an end figuratively. But then she wakes up the next day and she says in the song, "The world didn't stop for my broken heart." And isn't it true that when we're going through a personal disaster or difficulty of some kind, you sort of think the world is going to stop, but it doesn't. Life goes on, right? And it's kind of hard to realize, but when we realize that life goes on, and we should too, even though it's a difficult time, a difficult season, whether it's the loss of a job or the loss of a loved one, we can grow from the experience. We don't always grow through those experiences accidentally. It does usually take some intentional thought and reflection, but we can grow from that experience. Growth can happen in sports. That's one of the reasons parents encourage their children to find a sport or an extracurricular activity, right? Is we know that kids can learn some good lessons when they do something like play sports. They can learn lessons like a game or a match shouldn't cause you to lose control of your emotions, right? Lessons like being a good sport, whether you win or whether you lose, respect, teamwork, hard work, how to keep going when it's tough, right? Not quitting just because you don't feel good that day, being on time, and some of those character development opportunities come from just participating in that kind of that growth environment. Nothing wrong with that. Again, the level of growth we get from those experiences in life can range from accidental growth that just naturally happens to intentional growth. And we're going to get into that in a moment. But here's the thing, the level of growth that we get out of life is going to some degree, be determined by the effort we put in to maximize the growth of that experience. And again, how much effort we put into it, giving it our all, giving it our best, reflecting on the lessons learned, and then applying those lessons to our life going forward, right? So swinging back over to what does intentional growth look like? I talk about, sports obviously can be one way you can be intentional about it. But for adults, that doesn't necessarily look like playing high school football. But it might mean like training to run a race or to climb a figurative or literal mountain like that. The challenge that's going around right now, the 2029-foot Everest challenge, where you spend like 3 days and you climb like a mountain in Colorado somewhere 15 times until you reach the 29,000 feet of elevation climbed that represents Everest, right? That's a physical challenge where someone is training and striving for an event. Now, that's one way that we can take that same concept of our kids playing sports and apply that to our situation as adults. Now, other physical ways to ignite growth, things like fasting for a time period, eliminating a certain food or food group for a specific time period, anything that builds discipline and anything that requires discipline can create a growth opportunity. But by far, my favorite and probably the most effective way that I've seen for people to intentionally develop themselves and intentionally grow is reading. And, when I say reading, it could be listening to an audiobook or listening to an audio podcast like this. But reading, whether you're listening to it these days or actually reading the book, it's one of the best ways to be intentional with our growth. It's one of the best ways to develop our character. You can access the most brilliant minds from history throughout the world through the power of books. And the knowledge is so available these days. We are in the information age where you can learn just about anything so easily, so quickly. Access to knowledge has never been easier. And that's one of the ways we can be intentional about developing ourselves is tap in to that wisdom and knowledge that others who have gone on before us are willing to share. Now, remember, it's not just about reading the book. You got to think about what you're reading. You got to think about how it applies to you. And then you have to apply the lesson, right? It's not enough to just read it. If you just read it and don't do anything different, then it hasn't helped you move forward. So, just reading the material, not really going to help you a lot, but reading the material, reflecting on it, applying the lessons and applying them specifically to your life. That's where you turn that information into knowledge, right? Now, here's just a side note here. There is wisdom that can be gained from fiction books as well as nonfiction. I think you get more opportunity for learning from nonfiction as a general rule, but I once heard Jimmy Collins. He was Truett Cathy's third employee back in the 1960s when Truett Cathy was getting ready to open Chick-fil-A. And Jimmy Collins came on as the CEO, COO, and he was the second his book Creative Followership talks about following Truett Cathy, but Jimmy Collins was one of the leaders, second only to Truett Cathy, who helped build Chick-fil-A and the culture that has lasted for decades there. But he told me one time, he said, I read a lot of historical fiction books. He said, a book doesn't have to be true to contain truth. And that stuck with me, right? Words of wisdom. I think back to like Aesop's fables. If you've ever read them, I assume maybe they're still around. I don't know. That's been a long time since I read that. But they were just parable stories. They weren't made up stories, but they had a parable and they always had a good lesson in them, right? There are a lot of children's stories that have good lessons in them. And it's one of the ways that we help our children grow is reading them good stories that have a lesson, that have a teaching moment, right? I think I learned a lot about people from reading nonfiction early in life because I was so socially limited growing up. And so that's one way that I learned a lot is reading fictional stories. But overall, I would say that nonfiction brings the best growth opportunities. So think about this. If you just learned one thing every day for the next 365 days, would you think differently this time next year than you do today? Yeah, no doubt. If you learned 365 more pieces of knowledge, you would think at a different, higher level than you do today, right? So here's the key. Consistency. You don't have to read a book all day. Just try to read something every day. Try to learn something every day. Try to grow some way every day. And one last thing about growth. When we grow in one area or dimension of our life, it generally can help us grow in other areas too. So when you develop your character, like relative to healthy physical habits, for example, that will generally start to find you more naturally inclined toward creating better habits emotionally and vice versa. It's one of the reasons, like when we grow in one area of life, physical or emotional or spiritual, that starts to stretch over to the other dimensions of life. And that can be really powerful, right? Then we start leveraging our growth in multiple ways. So I hope you walk away from today's podcast episode just inspired and committed to your own growth, whatever that looks like for you. It can be reading a paragraph a day like Mac. His commitment to personal growth is one paragraph a day. Now, a lot of times I've seen him read a whole book in a day, but his commitment to himself is one paragraph a day. And I love that because it's a small but very achievable goal. Like nothing's going to get in the way of reading one paragraph a day, right? So again, consistency, small steps over time lead to big results. Now, a paragraph a day may not be your goal. Mine is a book a week. You have to figure out what's the best, but what's the best growth plan for yourself? What's the best goal for yourself? What's the best way that you can read and listen? Again, paragraph a day or a book a week or a book a month. Just be intentional about setting that goal and then just be intentional about achieving it. every single day, right? Remember, life is tough, but God's grace is always enough, and we need it every single day. Until next time.